Welcome back to Face the Nation. One of the biggest opponents of the Iran nuclear deal was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He joins us from Jerusalem. It's good to be with you, Mr. Prime Minister. Why do you think what the president has done is going to lead to a better situation?
Well, I'm focused on the result, and I think that right now the deal as it stands guarantees that Iran will have not a single nuclear bomb, but an entire nuclear arsenal within 10 years. And I think the president was very courageous in saying, I'm not going to kick this can down the road. I'm not going to say, well, it's going to be on somebody else's watch. I'm going to stop this from happening because, remember, we cannot allow Iran, the world's foremost terrorist regime that hangs gays, kills protesters, jails journalists, and foments aggression throughout the region and the world. We cannot allow this rogue regime, 30 times the size of North Korea's economy, to have a nuclear arsenal. It's a very brave decision, and I think it's the right decision for the world.
To get the leverage that would be required to get what you want, Iran has to be isolated by the world community and split at home. Hasn't the president's view, based on the ally reaction, united the allies that were a part of this deal against what President Trump is doing?
Well, they say that they want to keep the deal. And the president has said correctly, either fix it or nix it, either change it or cancel it. If they want to save the deal, then the European allies should start working with the United States to actually correct its deficiencies. And there are many. They have to, they're very clear, and they have to be changed. And it's an opportunity that President Trump has created for them to fix this very bad deal, which is dangerous for them, no less than it is for others.
But they believe that changing the deal basically breaks the deal.
No, in fact, if you don't change it, you break it. That's what the president told them, that if they don't change it, if they don't fix it, if they don't prevent Iran from automatically getting in a decade to a nuclear arsenal, then he'll cancel the deal. So I think that once they realize that this is the American position, they should join forces with the United States and with the president and work to change this. And by the way, you should know that in the Middle East, something very historic is happening. I mean, it's not just Israel that is supporting the president. It's key Arab states like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And I suggest that, you know, when Israel and the key Arab states agree on something, you know, you should pay attention. We're close to, with our ears to the ground. We live right here next to Iran. We see what it's doing. And I think that what the president has done is created now space to prevent a very bad deal from materializing and to fix it. Everybody should join forces in doing just that.
What's your response to those, including the signatories to this agreement, who say that Iran has been abiding by the agreement and that while 10 years is a deadline you picked, that in fact there are longer deadlines where Iran will be monitored, and if they break and try to move back to a nuclear capability, the entire world will see and jump on them right away?
John, I've always said that the greatest danger of this deal is not that Iran will violate it, but that Iran will keep it. Because under the deal, in a few years' time, Iran is guaranteed to have as many as 100 nuclear bombs. That's folly. And kicking the can down the road is not wise policy. So whether or not they keep it or violate it is not the point. The point is they have a highway right now to, assuming they keep the deal, to get to that point where they become a terrorist rogue regime with a vast nuclear arsenal. So that really has to be stopped. And I don't think the issue right now is whether they keep it or whether they violate it. The issue right now is we've got to change the destination to which they're heading.
The supporters of the deal obviously dispute your characterization of their ability to get those bombs. But let me ask you about this scenario, which is what if Iran looks at what President Trump has done and says, OK, no deal, we're going to go back to the full sprint to a nuclear program and blame the U.S. president for breaking the agreement?
Well, they could have done that right from the start. They could have rushed to the bomb. You know, they never wanted to do that because there's always been a combination of the threat of a credible military response, which, by the way, we put forward. We didn't need others to put it forward. And equally, crippling sanctions. Remember, I stood in the UN a few years ago and I drew that red line. That's before the deal. They didn't cross it because they knew what the stakes are. And Iran today knows that if they do what you just said, they're going to get crippling sanctions on their heads. The U.S. alone can do that. The U.S. is, it's a very powerful economy. It's almost a $20 trillion economy. The Iranian economy is 2% of that. So you think when countries have to choose between the U.S. economy and the Iranian economy, what will they choose? That's a no-brainer. So Iran faces crippling sanctions by the U.S. alone, let alone the U.S. with its allies. I think they're going to think twice.
All right, Mr. Prime Minister, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
This week, President Trump suggested comparing his IQ to that of his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. He was responding to the report, disputed throughout the administration, that Tillerson had called him a moron. But an IQ test is not the test we want our presidents to ace. The better measure of presidential greatness is emotional intelligence, EQ, as it is called, the ability to understand and regulate your emotions and read the emotions of those around you. In presidents, it is a part of temperament and encompasses restraint, equilibrium, and grace under pressure. It's what Lincoln had. Justice Holmes said of FDR that he had a second-class intellect, but a first-class temperament. This week is the 55th anniversary of one of the greatest tests of presidential temperament, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviet Union put nuclear weapons 90 miles from the American coast, one of the most dangerous moments in presidential history. Presidential temperament and EQ is tested every day in ways little and small, in the way a president reacts to slights and to other countries. On the big tests of presidential temperament like North Korea, it's a test we're all taking along with him. Back in a moment. Turning now to some political analysis, Molly Ball, who has been with The Atlantic for 6 years, was just named national political correspondent for Time magazine. She'll move over there at the end of the month. Congratulations, Molly. David Ignatius is a columnist for The Washington Post, and Jonah Goldberg is senior editor at The National Review. David, I want to start with you. Before we move on to the Iran deal, these comments by Senator Corker about the Secretary of State, it's extraordinary. What do you make of it?
They are critical in a way. The comments about Trump's view of the Secretary, I can't remember anything quite like it. What we saw with Secretary Tillerson just now is that he can take a punch. He is an unflappable guy. He sat here and you asked him, about the comment that he'd been castrated, and he looked back and said, "This is a president who's unconventional. He likes action-forcing events. He clearly gets the way the president operates, and he's decided he can live within those constraints." To be Secretary of State and go around the world talking to foreign leaders when it's been asserted by a leading senator that you've been castrated, not an easy challenge, but we saw the Secretary of State who clearly is ready to keep doing that.
Molly, on the Hill, not everybody rushed to Corker's side, but also didn't denounce him really much either. Is this a moment and we're going to move on, or is this, what do you make of it?
Well, it's, for one thing, Senator Corker only said out loud something that a lot of people already thought, and that we could see publicly with the undercutting of the Secretary of State by the president. And you had him sitting here just a few minutes ago, basically saying in euphemistic terms, yes, I don't know what he's going to do from 1 minute to the next either, and that's just the way things are. But you are seeing now in moments like the tiff with Corker that the Republicans are not afraid of Trump anymore, and that the relationship is so badly broken between Trump and Capitol Hill that I don't know that there's any repairing it unless they can find a way to actually get something done, as Senator Graham was saying. But Republicans on the Hill have been bashed by the president, perhaps deservingly. They don't have a lot to fall back on in terms of accomplishments, and so they're not super pleased with him.
Do you think the president can fix this, Jonah?
Well, I don't think he thinks there's much to fix. I think, he's, 71 years old. He's not going to change. This is who he is. And I think one of the things that Washington is still grappling with is we all like to think of the president as the boss, right? That's his role, as the boss. But he's also broken the blood-brain barrier between reality show culture, TV culture, and politics, and he's also the talent. And as you may know in this business, there's some people on TV a lot who have very high expectations about bowls of green M&Ms and how everything has to be the right way. And he wants to be treated like the talent, not just the boss. And that's very difficult to do in politics. And that's why we keep having these sort of eruptions. This Corker episode is not the last one, and it wasn't the first one. And it's going to be going on. That's the Trump show.
Yeah. David, what do you think about this idea of good cop, bad cop? So one of the criticisms of the president is he undermined Secretary Tillerson on North Korea, saying, you know, you're wasting your time, Rex. On the other hand, isn't there a way in which that could help the Secretary of State who says, I've got a president here who thinks I'm wasting my time, you better prove, you know, he's ready to go do military action?
It may be that this disruptive, destabilizing, bad cop, this temperamental president gives you some maneuvering room with China. I think it probably is true that the Chinese have been destabilized by this president, and that they've opened up some space. They're more cooperative on North Korea than they have been previously, and the president clearly is hoping, as he gets ready to go to China next month, that he's going to get help from North Korea. Is it helping with North Korea itself? How does it affect Kim Jong-un, this very irrational, we think, North Korean leader? And there you have to really worry that getting in this tit-for-tat, this kind of playground argument with a guy who's speeding to have nuclear capability is not a good idea. That is not what a careful steward of American security would do, and I think that's one of the things that's worrying people around town. I hear lots of credit for the president's policies on China and the kind of bad cop side of that, not on North Korea.
General, what do you make of the Iranian decision by the president, and where we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I thought it was a terrible deal. I thought it was structured in a way that was front-loaded all the rewards for Iran and put them on, as Senator Graham was saying, and put them on a path to a bomb. I think Donald Trump has, you know, and I'm critical of Donald Trump about all of these things, but I think he's absolutely right on this, in that sending this to Congress is in many ways sort of a middle ground position. He's not pulling out of the treaty. It's not even a treaty, which was one of my problems with it. I did enjoy the interview with the Iranian foreign minister, who, first of all, seemed very, very concerned about America's reputation in the world, which is very considerate of them. And I loved the idea that they were worrying about America's credibility in the UN and how outrageous it is for America to violate UN resolutions. Iran violates UN resolutions daily. It is doing it right now. It violated 2231. It's arming Hezbollah, which it's not allowed to do. And the idea that somehow Iran can somehow take the high road in all of this, I find ridiculous.
Well, and Molly, clearly Senator Graham was working Jonah's point, which is, you want to defend an agreement with them? You know, they're doing all of these bad things. He thinks he can get 60 votes for something out of the Senate. What do you think?
Well, and he also said that Trump is keeping a campaign promise, and I think that's what really mattered to the president. I think he's clearly frustrated that he hasn't been able to get more done, particularly through the Congress, and he wants to keep some of those promises that a lot of his supporters are being frustrated, are getting frustrated, aren't being kept. So it reminds me very much of what he did on DACA, which was to find a way to thread the needle between, you know, if I change the status quo, people will be mad. But if I don't, the people who wanted me to challenge the status quo, the people who wanted me to be disruptive, the people who, you know, so many of the Trump voters I spoke to, it wasn't about a particular ideology. They just wanted to see somebody break through the gridlock and get something done. The problem is when you have an administration and a party that are divided on these issues, warring factions, and a president who has no particular ideological center, he doesn't lead them in a particular direction, and so you end up with these on the one hand, on the other hand situations where the status quo essentially is maintained.
David, can the needle be thread here, which is essentially keep the deal but change the deal in Congress?
Most analysts think that it will not be possible to get Iran to agree to changes. They will not reopen the deal. I think we're heading into a period in which the agreement and all the issues that surround it will be in limbo. And so I think there's a real question about whether that's in America's or Israel's security interest. This was something that was locked down. You can say, well, it's a terrible problem in 15 years, but right now it's pretty much locked down. A lot of issues now are open. The needle threading will be working with Congress to adopt things that would apply to U.S. policy but wouldn't go to the deal itself. And I think he probably will get away with those. If I heard the Iranian foreign minister right, he was saying we will not be the first to withdraw from this deal. So if you don't do things that actually are in violation of the deal, it's probably in our interest to stick with it. What I'm hearing from Europeans, genuine unhappiness about this. They want the United States to be the sort of fixed North Star in foreign policy, and they find us very erratic, and I think they're genuinely upset. Anybody in the administration who thinks, oh well, we'll get the French, I don't hear that.
Yeah. General, let me switch to domestic politics quickly. A pretty effective week for the president undoing some pillars of the Obama legacy, not only on the Affordable Care Act, but the Clean Power Act. What did you make of this week, particularly with respect to health care and what the president's trying to do?
Yeah, I think what the president is doing, or what the administration is doing, is reacting to the fact that, as Lindsey Graham said earlier, Congress can't get anything done. And so Donald Trump is trying to accumulate a record of talking points about things that he has gotten done. I think on this too, the administration's on the right side of the argument on the health care thing. These payments were ruled illegal by a court, but the problem, and this is the problem, Trump, for good or ill, is shoving all this stuff on Congress. As a Article 1 guy, I think that's great because I want Congress to step up. It's the first branch of government. It's not stepping up, and that dysfunction empowers people like Steve Bannon and others to basically tear apart the Republican Party. And if Congress doesn't start getting things done, I do think you could see the dissolution of the Republican Party. It's already basically split into 3 parties as we speak.
And quickly, Molly, Charlie Denton, the congressman, retiring Republican from Pennsylvania, said that now President Trump owns health care as an issue. You can't blame Obama anymore. Do you think that's right, and will that play out that way politically?
It certainly appears to be the case in polls. It certainly was the way it played out for President Obama. I mean, in the 2010 midterms, Obamacare was the dominant issue, and even though it hadn't been implemented yet at all, people blamed the administration in power for anything they didn't like about their health care, and I think that was a big political reason that Democrats got, in the president's words, shellacked. And so this is a tricky issue, a tough issue. Trump's not wrong when he says Republicans spent 7 years promising to do this, and then there was nothing on his desk when he got there. So yeah, I think that they all own it.
All right, there we go. That's the end of our conversation. Thank you. Coming up next, the last time he was on Face the Nation, he joined us from a couple hundred miles from the surface of the Earth. Astronaut Scott Kelly is back down on the ground, and we'll be with him in a moment when we come back. And we're back with Captain Scott Kelly, who is on the ground in New York. The subject of his new book, Endurance, is the year he spent in space. Captain Kelly, we're very glad to have you with us. You write in your book that you were a below-average guy stepping into an above-average role. Is that a modesty, or is that hope for the rest of us?
I think it's both modesty and the truth. I was, this kid that couldn't pay attention in school growing up. If I was in school today, I'd be, probably diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, and it wasn't easy for me as a kid until I found some inspiration.
Do you think that the fact that it wasn't easy actually was helpful in terms of one of the words we hear a lot these days, which is developing grit?
Well, it certainly allowed me to, develop a sense of, endurance, and I think it's one of the reasons why I showed that, chose to use that title, is that, it wasn't easy, and it was a long path for me to go from struggling student in school to astronaut that spent a year in space.
When you were up there, endurance sounds like a constant slog. Was it any fun?
Oh, it was a lot of fun and rewarding, challenging, really hard work, and a privilege to be able to serve my country as an astronaut at NASA for 20 years.
How long after you came back did it take when you could wake up and not think, oh, I'm back on the planet Earth again?
That took, only a few days, but there were a lot of other lingering effects of being in space. Most of them were gone after a couple of months, but I think it took probably about 8 months until I felt completely back to normal.
And what do you miss from your time up there?
I miss the work. It's very challenging, technically challenging and exacting work, and something I believe greatly in. And I miss the people, my crewmates that I was up there with. They were all great, and even though they're all back on Earth, I don't get to see them as much anymore.
You grew up during the Cold War. Some of your mates were Russians. What was that like?
They were, great colleagues and partners. I have a, really fond, memories of my time I've spent in Russia and my crewmates. And, even though at times our countries can be in conflict, at odds over things, we on the space station have to get along very well because we literally depend on each other for our lives.
One of the things you did while you were up there was take spacewalks. What is that process like? It looks on the one hand fun, but I'm guessing it's quite tense too.
It's the type 2 kind of fun. Type 1 fun is, the roller coaster. Type 2 fun is the stuff that's really, really hard and challenging, but it's fun when you're finished with it, and it's, you feel very, very satisfied and accomplished. Same time, a really incredible experience to be outside a spacecraft, doing work on behalf of NASA and our country.
Based on your experience, what are your thoughts about sending an astronaut into space for a mission to Mars, which would require an extended period of time?
Well, I'd volunteer to do it if that opportunity presented itself. I think it's something that we should do. I think we're capable of getting there. The challenge is having the right political support and the money to go and do it.
You were, in a sense, a guinea pig for this trip and studying your body and the way it changed. What did you learn that will be helpful for that trip to Mars?
There was a lot of science based on me and my Russian colleague Misha Kornienko being in space for a year, but there was also science done on my brother and I with this twin study. And a lot of the results, I think, will help us go to Mars. There are a lot of negative things that happen to our physiology from being in space for long periods of time. And those are the challenges we have to, continue to work on and figure out if we're going to have people spend much longer in space than we currently have.
Are they surmountable challenges, or did you discover something in terms of the physiology that really is, a tough nut to crack?
I think they're solvable. We have challenges with the human physiology, but also the the technical challenges of building a spacecraft and supporting the crew for a real long time. But I'll steal a phrase from my brother that he often says, and getting to Mars is not about rocket science; it's about political science and the support and the money to do it.
All right, Captain Kelly, thanks so much for being with us. If you want to hear more from Scott Kelly, he will join our colleagues in Studio 57 on CBS This Morning tomorrow, and we'll be back in a moment. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.